The first frost came 6 weeks early to the Montana Territory in 1883, and Clara Hartwell watched 13 months of backbreaking labor die in a single night. She stood in her garden at dawn, her worn calico dress doing little against the bitter wind, staring at the blackened tomato vines and frozen squash that had promised to see her through the winter. The potato leaves hung limp and crystallized, the bean plants sagged like broken promises, and the corn stalks stood rigid as tombstones in the pale morning light. Everything was ruined. Everything she had worked for since her husband died last spring was gone, and winter was coming fast to the remote valley she had stubbornly refused to leave. Clara was 24 years old, a widow of barely 8 months, and she had bet everything on this harvest. When Thomas died after his horse threw him into a ravine, everyone in the nearest town of Copper Ridge, 15 miles south, told her to sell the homestead and move back east. But Clara had come west with dreams, and she would not let them die with her husband. She had planted that garden with her own hands, working until her back ached and her palms bled, determined to prove she could make it alone. Now those dreams lay frozen in the dirt, and the first snow had not even fallen yet. She knelt down and touched a blackened tomato, still hard and green beneath the frost damage. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying would not fill her root cellar. Crying would not keep her alive when the snow came. She stood up, brushed the frost from her skirt, and walked back to the small cabin Thomas had built. Inside, she took inventory of what she had. 3 dozen eggs from her chickens, though they would stop laying soon in the cold. 2 smoked hams hanging in the cellar, a barrel of flour, half full. Some dried beans Thomas had bought last fall. Some salt and sugar. It was not enough, not nearly enough to last until spring. The knock on her door came 3 days later, just as the first snow began to fall. Clara was sitting at her table, trying to make her meager supplies stretch on paper, knowing that no amount of arithmetic would create food where there was none. She rose and opened the door to find a tall man standing on her porch, his hat dusted with snow, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or Oklahoma. "Name is Jacob Brennan. I have the ranch about 8 miles north of here, up near the pine forest." Clara studied him. She had heard of Brennan. Everyone in the territory had. He ran cattle on a large spread with a crew of cowboys, kept to himself mostly, but was known to be fair and honest. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and blue eyes that looked almost gray in the dim light. Outdoors, but there was a gentleness in outdoors, but there was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. "Mr. Brennan," she said carefully, "what brings you out in this weather?" "I heard in town that the early frost hit your garden hard," he said. "Heard you lost your whole harvest." Clara stiffened. She did not want pity. She had endured enough pitying looks to last a lifetime. "I will manage," she said. "I am sure you will," Jacob said. "But I have more supplies than I need for the winter. My root cellar is full, and I have extra stores. I thought you might accept some help, neighborly thing to do." "I cannot pay you," Clara said, her pride making her voice sharp. "I am not asking for payment," Jacob said simply. He gestured to the pack horse. "I have potatoes, turnips, carrots, dried beef, more flour, some preserves my cook made. More than enough for both of us to make it through the winter comfortably." Clara wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him she needed no one, that she could survive on her own. But the truth was stark and unavoidable. Without help, she would starve before spring. And there was something in Jacob Brennan's eyes that was not pity. It was simply kindness offered without expectation. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Jacob was quiet for a moment, snow gathering on his broad shoulders. "My mother was widowed when I was 12, he said finally. "My father died in a stampede. We were in Texas then, and that first winter nearly killed us. A neighbor named Sam Houston, not the Sam Houston, but named after him, brought us food every week, never asked for anything, never made my mother feel small for needing help. He just said, that is what people do when times are hard. They help each other. When he died years later, my mother made me promise I would do the same if I ever had the means." He met her eyes. "Now I have the means, Mrs. Hartwell. And you need help. So I am here." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in out of the snow, Mr. Brennan, and thank you, truly." Jacob spent the next hour unloading supplies into her cabin and root cellar. He brought sacks of potatoes, carrots, and turnips, all carefully packed in straw. He brought dried beef and venison, flour and cornmeal, jars of preserved peaches and tomatoes, dried beans and peas, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and even a small sack of apples. Clara watched in amazement as her empty shelves filled. It was more food than she had seen in months. "This is too much," she protested. "You will not have enough for yourself." "I have plenty," Jacob assured her. "I have a full crew to feed, but we laid in supplies for a hard winter. We have livestock, chickens, a dairy cow. We will be fine." When he was finished, Clara made coffee, and they sat at her small table while the snow fell more heavily outside. She noticed how careful Jacob was, how he kept a respectful distance, how his manner was polite and gentle. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since Thomas died. "How long have you been in Montana?" she asked. 5 years, Jacob said. "I came up from Oklahoma with a herd and decided to stay. The land here is good for cattle, and I like the mountains. It feels like a place a man can build something lasting." "That is what Thomas and I thought," Clara said softly. "We came from Illinois 2 years ago. He wanted land of his own, a place to raise a family." Her voice caught. "We did not have much time." "I am sorry for your loss," Jacob said, and his voice held genuine sympathy. "It is a hard thing to lose someone you planned a life with." They talked for another hour, cautious and polite, learning the basic facts of each other's lives. Jacob told her about his ranch, about his small crew of 5 cowboys who worked for him, about the 100 head of cattle he ran. Clara told him about Illinois, about her parents who had not wanted her to come west, about how much she had loved this wild country despite its hardships. When Jacob finally rose to leave, the snow was falling thick and fast. "I will check on you in a few weeks," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Make sure you have everything you need, and if you need anything before then, you ride up to my ranch. Do not hesitate." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," Clara said. "I do not know how to repay this kindness." "No repayment needed," Jacob said. He put on his hat and smiled at her, a slow, warm smile that transformed his serious face. "Just survive the winter, Mrs. Hartwell. That will be thanks enough." After he left, Clara stood in her cabin surrounded by the food he had brought, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. The snow fell steadily for 3 days, blanketing the valley in white. Clara kept busy, caring for her chickens, rationing her supplies carefully, even though she now had plenty, keeping her fire burning and her cabin warm. She found herself thinking about Jacob Brennan more than she expected. There was something about him that lingered in her mind, the quiet strength in his manner, the kindness in his eyes, the way he had helped her without making her feel ashamed. She told herself it was only gratitude. She was a widow after all, and her husband had been dead less than a year. It would not be proper to think of another man. But in the long dark evenings as the wind howled outside her cabin, she remembered the sound of Jacob's voice, the warmth of having someone to talk to, and she felt lonely in a way she had not let herself acknowledge before. 2 weeks after his first visit, Jacob returned. This time he brought fresh meat, 2 chickens he had butchered, and more supplies. He also brought news from town. "There is talk that this will be a harder winter than usual," he said as Clara poured him coffee. "The Blackfeet up north are already moving to lower ground. The animals are growing thicker coats. I wanted to make sure you are prepared." "I have everything I need thanks to you," Clara said, "but I worry about my chickens. The coop is not well insulated. I am afraid they will freeze when the temperature really drops." "I can help you fix that," Jacob offered. "If you have some spare boards and straw, we can reinforce the coop this afternoon." They worked together for several hours, Jacob doing the heavy labor while Clara helped where she could. She found herself watching him as he worked, noticing the easy competence with which he handled tools, the strength in his shoulders as he lifted boards into place. He was patient and thorough, making sure every gap was sealed, every wall reinforced. When they were finished, the coop was snug and warm. "Those chickens will be comfortable now," Jacob said, brushing straw from his coat. "They should keep laying through most of the winter if they are warm enough." "I cannot thank you enough," Clara said. "You have done so much for me, and I have done nothing for you in return. You made me coffee and gave me conversation, Jacob said. That is something. It gets lonely on the ranch sometimes, especially in winter when we are all cooped up together. It is nice to talk to someone new. Clara hesitated, then said, Would you like to stay for supper? It is the least I can do. I have venison stew, and I made biscuits this morning. Jacob's face brightened. I would like that very much, Mrs. Hartwell. Thank you. They ate together as darkness fell, and Clara found that she enjoyed having him there. Jacob was easy to talk to, thoughtful in his responses, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He told her stories about his childhood in Texas, about learning to rope and ride from Mexican vaqueros, about the long cattle drives he had been on before settling in Montana. Clara told him about her life in Illinois, about teaching at a small school before she married Thomas, about her love of books and learning. Do you have many books? Jacob asked. A few, Clara admitted. I brought some with me when we came west. Thomas used to tease me about weighing down the wagon with books instead of practical things. I would not tease you for that, Jacob said. I wish I had more education. I can read and write well enough, but there is so much I do not know. Sometimes I feel ignorant. You are not ignorant, Clara said firmly. You know how to survive in this country, how to build and fix things, how to raise cattle. That is its own kind of education. Maybe, Jacob said, but I would still like to know more about the world, history, literature, all the things people learn in school. An idea came to Clara. I could lend you some books, she offered, if you would like. I have a volume of Shakespeare, some Dickens, a history of Rome. Jacob's eyes lit up. I would like that very much, if you are sure you do not mind. I do not mind at all, Clara said. It would make me happy to know someone else is enjoying them. When Jacob left that night, he carried 2 books carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the snow. He promised to return them in good condition and to come back in another 2 weeks to check on her. Clara watched him ride away into the darkness, and she realized she was already looking forward to his next visit. The winter deepened, snow piled high around Clara's cabin, and the temperature dropped until the air itself seemed to crackle with cold. Clara kept her fire burning day and night, venturing out only to care for her chickens and to bring in firewood. The isolation was profound. Some days she saw nothing but white wilderness and gray sky. But every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Jacob Brennan appeared. He always brought something, fresh meat, more supplies, firewood he had cut from his own stores. But more than the physical things he brought companionship. He would stay for supper, and they would talk for hours. He told her about his ranch, about the challenges of keeping cattle alive in the brutal cold, about his men and their quirks and personalities. Clara told him about the books she was reading, about her dreams of one day returning to teaching, about the loneliness of widowhood. Slowly, carefully, they were becoming friends. But it was more than friendship, though neither of them said it aloud. Clara found herself preparing for his visits, putting on her better dress, arranging her hair with more care. She noticed the way Jacob's eyes lingered on her face, the way he smiled when she laughed, the way he seemed reluctant to leave. There was an attraction growing between them, undeniable and powerful, but both of them held back. Clara was still in mourning, and Jacob was too respectful to push. Then came the blizzard. It struck in late January, a howling monster of a storm that came out of the north with winds that shook Clara's cabin and snow that fell so thick she could not see her own chicken coop. The temperature plummeted. Clara burned through her firewood faster than she had planned, and by the second day of the storm, she was rationing it carefully, knowing she could not afford to run out. On the 3rd day, the door to her cabin burst open, and Jacob stumbled in, covered in snow, his face raw with cold. Clara cried out in shock and rushed to help him. He was leading his horse, and he pulled the animal inside the cabin before slamming the door against the wind. "What are you doing out in this?" Clara demanded, helping him out of his frozen coat. "You could have died." "I was worried about you," Jacob said through chattering teeth. "This storm is worse than anything I have seen. I had to make sure you were all right." "You fool," Clara said, but her voice was full of emotion. "You should not have risked yourself." "I could not stay away knowing you were alone," Jacob said simply. Clara made him sit by the fire and wrapped him in blankets. She made hot coffee and fed his horse what grain she had. The storm raged outside, and it became clear that Jacob would not be leaving any time soon. He was stranded here with her until the blizzard passed. The first day was awkward. They were acutely aware of being alone together in the small cabin, of the impropriety of the situation. But necessity overrode propriety. They had to survive. Jacob helped Clara manage her firewood, showing her how to bank the fire to use less wood while keeping the cabin warm. They took care of the animals together. They cooked and ate simple meals, and they talked more openly than they had before. "I need to tell you something," Clara said on the second night of the blizzard, "to feel obligated. You have done more than you should. I am grateful for everything you have done for me. But I do not want you to feel obligated. You have done more than enough, more than anyone could expect." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you think?" he asked finally. "That I am doing this out of obligation?" "I do not know," Clara said honestly. "Why else would you keep coming, keep bringing me things, keep checking on me?" Jacob turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "I come because I want to see you," he said quietly. "Because I think about you all the time. Because when I am at the ranch, I count the days until I can ride down here again. Because you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and being near you makes me happy." Clara's heart was pounding. "Jacob," she whispered. "I know it is too soon," Jacob said quickly. "I know you are still grieving your husband. I do not mean to disrespect his memory or to push you, but I needed you to know that I am not helping you out of obligation. I am helping you because I care about you. Very much." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "I care about you too," she admitted. "I have tried not to. I have told myself it is too soon, that I am being disloyal to Thomas. But I cannot help it. When you are here, I feel alive again. When you leave, the cabin feels empty. I look forward to your visits more than I should." Jacob reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and gentle. "There is no set time for grief," he said softly. "No one can tell you when it is right to feel something for someone else. Your heart knows what it needs." They sat holding hands, the fire crackling between them, the blizzard raging outside. It was not a declaration of love, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of what was growing between them, and that was enough for now. The blizzard lasted 5 days. By the end of it, Clara and Jacob had settled into an easy intimacy. They moved around each other in the small cabin with natural grace, anticipating each other's needs, working together seamlessly. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Jacob told her about the loneliness of building his ranch alone, about how he had always imagined sharing his life with someone, but had never met a woman who made him feel the way Clara did. Clara told him about her marriage to Thomas, honest about the fact that it had been a good marriage, but not a passionate one, that they had been partners more than lovers, that she had cared for him deeply, but perhaps had not been truly in love. "I feel guilty for admitting that," she said. "It feels like a betrayal." "It is not a betrayal, to be honest," Jacob said. "You married him. You built a life with him. You mourned him. That is not nothing. But it also does not mean you have to pretend to feelings you did not have." On the 5th night, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and stars appeared through breaks in the clouds. Jacob would be able to leave in the morning. They both knew it, and neither of them wanted it. They were sitting close by the fire, Clara's head resting on Jacob's shoulder. It felt natural, right? Jacob's arm was around her, and she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I do not want you to go," Clara said softly. "I do not want to go either," Jacob replied. "But people will talk if I stay longer. I do not want to damage your reputation." Clara laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "My reputation? I am a widow living alone on a failing homestead. I think my reputation is already damaged." "Not to me," Jacob said firmly. "You are a brave, strong, intelligent woman who has survived more than most people could endure. I respect you, Clara, and I will not do anything that might make people respect you less." Clara lifted her head and looked at him. In the firelight, his face was all strong planes and shadows, his eyes dark and intense. "What if I do not care what people think?" she asked. "You should care," Jacob said gently. "You have to live in this territory. So do I. We both know how small towns talk." "Then what do we do?" Clara asked. "Pretend we do not have feelings for each other? Go back to seeing each other every 2 weeks like polite strangers?" "No," Jacob said. "We court properly. I come to call on you, with all the propriety that requires. We get to know each other better. And when enough time has passed, when it is respectful and right, I will ask you to marry me." Clara's breath caught. "You want to marry me?" "Yes," Jacob said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am certain, Clara, you are the woman I want to spend my life with, the woman I want to build a future with. I will wait as long as you need, but that is what I am hoping for. That is what I am working toward." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not looking for this. I did not expect to not looking for this. I did not expect to feel this way again, but I do. When I think about the future, you are in it. You are the only thing in it. Jacob turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then we have an understanding," he said. "We will do this right. We will do this properly. And when the time comes, we will have a future together." That night, Clara slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that she was no longer alone, that someone loved her and wanted her, that there was hope and happiness in her future. Jacob left the next morning, but everything had changed. He returned 3 days later, this time in full daylight, riding up to her cabin like a proper suitor. He brought flowers, somehow preserved through the winter, delicate dried blossoms that he must have saved from last summer. Clara put them in a jar of water and displayed them on her table like treasure. He came twice a week after that, always at respectable hours, always behaving with perfect propriety. But the love between them grew stronger with each visit. They talked about their future, making plans. Jacob wanted Clara to see his ranch, to meet his men, to understand the life he was offering her. Clara wanted Jacob to understand her need for independence, her desire to contribute, to be a partner rather than just a wife. "I do not want to be taken care of," she told him one afternoon, as they sat in her cabin, watching snow fall gently outside. "I appreciate everything you have done for me, but I need to be useful. I need to have purpose." "I understand that," Jacob said, "and I would never want you to feel like you were just being kept. The ranch needs a woman's touch. My men are capable, but we have been living like bachelors. The house needs work, needs to be made into a real home. And I have been thinking about expanding, maybe bringing in some sheep along with the cattle. You have a head for figures and planning. I could use a partner in running the place." "I would like that," Clara said. "I want us to build something together, not just your ranch or my homestead, but something that belongs to both of us." "We will," Jacob promised. "Whatever we build, it will be ours together." In early March, when the worst of winter had passed, but snow still lay thick on the ground, Jacob took Clara to see his ranch. They rode together, Clara on a gentle mare Jacob had brought for her, through the pine forest and up into the higher country, where his land spread across a broad valley. The ranch house was bigger than Clara had expected, a solid log structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. There were barns and outbuildings, corrals for horses and cattle, a bunkhouse for the men. It was rough and masculine, but Clara could see the potential. She could imagine curtains in the windows, a garden beside the house, order and beauty brought to the raw functionality. Jacob's men were respectful and curious. There was Tom, the foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s who had known Jacob since Texas. There was young Billy, barely 20, who blushed and stammered when Clara spoke to him. There were the brothers, Pete and Sam, both good-natured and hard-working. And there was Charlie, a former buffalo hunter who had the best stories Clara had ever heard. "She is a fine woman, boss," Tom said to Jacob when Clara was out of earshot, looking at the house. "You hold on to her." "I intend to," Jacob said. Clara explored the house while Jacob tended to ranch business. It was spacious, with a large main room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and even a small room that could be used as an office or a spare bedroom. The furniture was rough but serviceable. The windows were dirty, the floors dusty, and there were cobwebs in the corners. But it was solid and well built, and Clara could see exactly what it could become. When Jacob found her, she was standing in the kitchen, her hands on her hips, mentally rearranging everything. "What do you think?" he asked nervously. "I think it needs a lot of work," Clara said honestly. Then she smiled at him, her eyes shining. "But I think it could be wonderful. I think we could be very happy here." Jacob's face broke into a wide smile. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Then you will marry me?" he asked. "You will come here and be my wife and help me build this place into something amazing?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice muffled against his chest. Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Brennan. I will marry you and love you and build a life with you. Jacob pulled back and kissed her, finally, after months of restraint. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, of hope and happiness. Clara melted into it, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling more alive than she had in years. They were married in late April, when the snow had melted and the first green shoots were pushing through the soil. The ceremony was held in Copper Ridge, in the small church that served the scattered community. Clara wore a simple blue dress she had remade from one of her better gowns, and Jacob wore a new suit he had ordered special from a catalog. Tom stood up with Jacob, and the wife of the town doctor stood up with Clara. It was a small ceremony, quiet and simple, but it was perfect. After the wedding, they returned to the ranch together. Clara's few possessions had already been moved from her cabin. The homestead would sit empty for now, but they planned to keep it, perhaps to use for storage or for future expansion. Clara would not give up that piece of land. It represented her survival, her strength, and Jacob understood that. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. Clara threw herself into making the house a home, cleaning and organizing, sewing curtains and tablecloths, planting a garden. Jacob was busy with the spring work, branding calves, mending fences, moving cattle to fresh pasture. But every evening they came together, eating dinner with the men in the main house, then retiring to their private quarters to talk and plan and fall deeper in love. The men gradually accepted Clara's presence. She won them over by cooking good meals, by treating their minor injuries and illnesses, by showing genuine interest in the ranch and its operations. She also proved that she was not afraid of work. She helped with the vegetable garden, tended the chickens, learned to milk the dairy cow, and even helped with the branding when they were shorthanded. "You have got yourself a hell of a woman there, Jacob," Charlie said one night, after Clara had stitched up a cut on his arm with steady hands. "She is tougher than most men I know." "I know," Jacob said, his eyes following Clara as she moved around the room, laughing at something Billy had said. "I am the luckiest man in Montana." That summer was one of the happiest times of Clara's life. She and Jacob worked side by side, building their future. They expanded the garden, built a new chicken coop, repaired the barn roof. Clara started teaching Billy to read better, and soon Tom and Pete were joining the lessons too. In the evenings, she would read aloud to the men, novels and poems and history, and Jacob would sit beside her with his hand on hers, his eyes full of love and pride. In the fall, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, then overwhelming happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Jacob pulled her into his arms. "Clara, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed. You have given me so much already, and now this. A child. Our child. I can hardly believe it." They told the men that night at supper, and there was general celebration. Tom produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and everyone toasted the coming baby. Billy blushed and stammered his congratulations. Charlie launched into a long story about a baby being born during a blizzard in a buffalo camp that may or may not have been true. It was a perfect evening, full of warmth and laughter and love. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara was sick for the first few months, and Jacob fretted over her constantly. He would not let her do any heavy work, and he hovered until Clara gently told him she needed space to breathe. But his concern came from love, and Clara tried to be patient with it. As winter approached again, Clara thought about the previous year, about her frozen garden and her terror of starvation, about the first time Jacob had appeared at her door with his pack horse and his quiet kindness. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been barely more than a year. So much had changed. She had been alone and desperate. Now she was surrounded by love, carrying a child, building a future she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked one evening. "Last year," Clara said. "About how lost I last year," Clara said. "About how lost I was, how scared. And then you came." "I am glad I came," Jacob said softly. "I am glad I listened to that voice telling me to check on you. If I had not, I would have missed all of this. I would have missed you." "Do you ever think about how strange it is?" Clara asked. "How one small thing can change everything. If the frost had not come early, if my garden had survived, I would not have needed help. We might never have met. We would have met eventually, Jacob said confidently. We were meant to find each other. The frost just hurried things along. Clara smiled and took his hand, pressing it more firmly against her belly. The baby is kicking, she said. Jacob's face lit up with wonder as he felt the tiny movements beneath his palm. Our baby, he said. I will never get used to how amazing this is. The baby came in early May, after a long, hard labor that left Clara exhausted but triumphant. It was a boy, healthy and strong-lunged, with a shock of dark hair like his father. They named him Thomas Jacob Brennan, honoring both Clara's first husband and his father. Jacob held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Clara felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. The men were delighted. Tom carved a cradle with his own hands, a beautiful piece of work with horses carved into the sides. Billy knitted a blanket, a lumpy, uneven thing that was clearly made with more love than skill. Charlie gave the baby a silver dollar to keep for luck. Pete and Sam built a rocking chair for Clara to use while nursing. The baby was welcomed into a family, surrounded by love and protection. Clara recovered slowly, and Jacob was there every step of the way, changing diapers, walking the floor with the baby at night, doing whatever Clara needed. She watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again, this time seeing him as a father, patient and gentle and devoted. Summer came, and the ranch thrived. The cattle were healthy, the garden was abundant, and little Thomas grew fat and happy. Clara returned to her routines, though now they included caring for an infant. She managed somehow, balancing her work with motherhood, and Jacob helped as much as he could. One afternoon in late summer, Clara and Jacob took the baby and rode up to a high meadow on the ranch property. They spread a blanket and sat together, the baby sleeping between them, looking out over the vast landscape. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic. The valleys spread below them, green and gold. The sky was endless blue, dotted with white clouds. This is ours, Jacob said quietly. All of this. We built this together. We did, Clara agreed. To my cabin, about your mother's neighbor, to my cabin, about your mother's neighbor who helped her. I remember, Jacob said. Sam Houston. He said it was what people do when times are hard. They help each other. You did that for me, Clara said. You helped me when I was desperate. You shared your food stores through the winter. But you gave me so much more than food, Jacob. You gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave me a future. Jacob reached over and took her hand. We gave each other a future, he said. I was lonely before I met you, Clara. I had land and money and success, but I did not have anyone to share it with. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching their son sleep, feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces. It was a moment of perfect peace, perfect happiness. I want more children, Clara said suddenly. I want this house full of life and laughter. I want a big family. Jacob smiled. So do I, as many as you want. We have plenty of room and plenty of love. And I want to keep teaching, Clara continued. I was thinking, maybe we could start a school here, for the ranch children and the children of the other homesteaders in the area. There are enough of them now to justify it. That is a wonderful idea, Jacob said enthusiastically. We could use the old cabin, your original homestead. Fix it up, turn it into a schoolhouse. You could teach there, give these children a chance at education. Clara's eyes shone. Yes, that would be perfect. It would be a way to give back, to help others the way you helped me. They talked for hours that afternoon, making plans, dreaming dreams. They would expand the ranch, bring in more cattle, perhaps try sheep as Jacob had mentioned. They would build the school, and Clara would teach. They would raise their children to be strong and kind and capable. They would grow old together in this wild, beautiful place, building a legacy that would outlast them both. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jacob gathered Clara and the baby into his arms. I love you, he said simply. More than I can ever tell you. You are everything to me. I love you too, Clara whispered. You saved my life, Jacob Brennan, and then you made it worth living. They rode back to the ranch as the stars began to appear, their small family together, their future bright with promise. The frozen garden and the desperate winter were just memories now, part of the story of how they came together, how they learned to love, how they built something beautiful out of hardship. The years that followed were full and rich. Clara had 3 more children, a daughter they named Sarah, born 2 years after Thomas, then another son, Samuel, and finally another daughter, little Grace. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, of family dinners and bedtime stories. Clara did start her school, teaching not just the ranch children, but any child whose family wanted education. She became known throughout the territory as a fine teacher, patient and knowledgeable. Jacob's ranch grew and prospered. He took on more land, increased his herds, and became one of the most successful ranchers in Montana Territory. But he never forgot where he came from, and he never forgot the lesson his mother had taught him. When other families faced hardship, Jacob was there with help. When drought hit one summer and several homesteaders lost their crops, Jacob organized a relief effort, distributing food and supplies. When a fire destroyed a neighbor's barn, Jacob and his men rebuilt it. He and Clara became pillars of their community, known for their generosity and kindness. Tom eventually retired and built a small house on ranch property, where he lived out his years as an honorary grandfather to the Brennan children. Billy grew into a confident young man and became foreman when Tom stepped down. Charlie finally settled down, marrying a widow from town and bringing her to live in a cabin they built near the ranch. Pete and Sam saved their wages and started their own small spread with cattle they bought from Jacob at a fair price. The ranch became more than just a business. It became a community, a family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Clara back to the meadow where they had sat with baby Thomas all those years ago. The children were home with Tom, and Clara and Jacob had the afternoon to themselves. They spread a blanket in the same spot and sat looking out over the land they loved. 10 years, Clara said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Best 10 years of my life, Jacob said. He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. I got you something. Clara unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, beautifully bound in leather, with gold lettering on the cover. It was a first edition of a novel she had mentioned loving years ago, but had never owned. Jacob, she breathed, this must have cost a fortune. And how did you even find it? I have been looking for 3 years, Jacob admitted. I finally found a dealer in Chicago who had a copy. I wanted you to have it. You gave up so much to come here, to build this life with me. You left behind civilization and culture and all the things you loved. I wanted you to have at least this one thing. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I did not give up anything, she said fiercely. I gained everything. This life, this wild, beautiful place, you, our children, our home. I would not trade any of it for all the culture and civilization in the world. Jacob kissed her, deep and sweet and full of love. I am a lucky man, he murmured against her lips. We are both lucky, Clara corrected. Think about that first winter. About how we met? All the time, Jacob said. I think about how close I came to not going to your cabin that day. I almost talked myself out of it. I thought maybe you would be offended. Maybe you would refuse help. If I had listened to those doubts, everything would be different. But you did not listen, Clara said. You came anyway. You helped me anyway. And you changed everything. They sat in silence, remembering the frozen garden and the desperate fear, remembering the knock on the door and the tall cowboy with kind eyes, remembering the blizzard that stranded them together, the conversations by firelight, the slow, careful courtship, remembering the wedding and the first year of marriage, the joy of building a life together, remembering the birth of their children, the growth of the ranch, the creation of something lasting and beautiful. I was thinking, Jacob said after a while, Thomas is 8 now, old enough to start learning ranch work in earnest, and Sarah is 6, ready for more responsibility. I was thinking maybe it is time to talk to them about the story, about how we met, about that first winter. Why? Clara asked curiously. Because I want them to understand, Jacob said. I want them to know that sometimes the hardest times lead to the best things. That help can come from unexpected places, that kindness matters, that when you see someone in need, you reach out, even if it is hard, even if it is uncertain. I want them to understand that the life they have was built on those principles. Clara thought about this. "You are right," she said. "They should know the story. They should understand where they came from. Not just the family history, but the values that built this family." That night, after dinner, with all 4 children gathered around the fireplace in the big main room, Clara and Jacob told the story. They told about the early frost in the frozen garden, about Clara's fear and desperation, about Jacob's decision to help, about the food stores that got Clara through the winter, about the blizzard and the courtship and the wedding. The children listened with wide eyes, fascinated by this glimpse into their parents' past. "So, Mama almost starved?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "I was in a very difficult situation," Clara said carefully. "But your father helped me. He shared what he had, even though he did not have to, even though he barely knew me." "Why did you help her, Papa?" Sarah asked. Jacob looked at his daughter, at her serious little face, and thought about how to answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because she needed help, and I could give it. Because we are supposed to take care of each other, especially in hard times. And because, even though I did not know it then, helping your mother was the best decision I ever made. It brought me everything I ever wanted." "It brought us all together," Clara added. "Sometimes one act of kindness can change everything. Your father's kindness changed my life, and it created all of this." She gestured around the warm, comfortable room, at the family gathered together. "It created you." Young Samuel, barely 4, climbed into Jacob's lap. "I am glad you helped Mama," he said seriously. "Otherwise, I would not be here." Everyone laughed and the mood lightened, but the lesson had been planted. The children understood, in their own ways, that their family was built on kindness, on helping others, on doing what was right, even when it was difficult. The children grew, and the story became part of the family lore, told and retold through the years. Thomas grew into a fine rancher, taking over more and more of the operations as Jacob aged. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over the school. Samuel studied law and became an advocate for homesteaders and small ranchers, fighting the big cattle companies that tried to squeeze out the little people. Grace, the youngest, became a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Montana, dedicated to serving the rural communities that had so few medical resources. Jacob and Clara watched their children grow and thrive with deep satisfaction. They had built something that would outlast them, not just in terms of land and property, but in terms of values and character. Their children carried forward the lessons they had learned, the importance of kindness and community, of hard work and integrity, of helping others in their time of need. On a cold winter evening, 30 years after that first desperate winter, Jacob and Clara sat by the fireplace in their bedroom. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies marked by decades of hard work and hard living. But they were still strong, still vital, and still deeply in love. "Do you have any regrets?" Clara asked, her head resting on Jacob's shoulder. "Not a single one," Jacob said. "Every decision I made, every path I chose, led me to you. How could I regret anything?" "Even the hard times?" Clara pressed. "The drought years? The winter we lost so many cattle? The time Samuel got so sick we thought we would lose him?" "Even those," Jacob said firmly. "The hard times made us stronger. They brought us closer together, and Samuel recovered. We got through it all together." Clara smiled. "Together," she repeated. "That is the key, is it not? We did it all together." "Always," Jacob said. He kissed the top of her head. "From that first winter until now, and for whatever time we have left. Together." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind outside, watching the fire burn down to embers. It was a scene they had repeated countless times over the decades, this quiet companionship, this deep, abiding love. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "For what?" Jacob asked. "For everything. For saving my life. For loving me. For giving me this beautiful life. For being the kind of man you are. For 30 years of happiness. For our children, our home, our future. For all of it." Jacob turned and kissed her properly, tenderly, with all the love of 30 years behind it. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me help you, for giving me a chance, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything, for loving me, for making me happier than I ever imagined possible." They held each other close, Two people who had found each other in the hardest of times and built something beautiful together. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the land in white. But inside, the house was warm, filled with the love and history of a family built on kindness. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Jacob and Clara grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family expand and flourish. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and the Brennan name became synonymous with integrity and success throughout Montana. Clara continued teaching well into her 60s, only retiring when her eyesight began to fail. Jacob worked alongside his son until his body could no longer keep up with the demands of ranch work, then became an advisor and mentor, passing on his knowledge and experience. They spent their final years much as they had spent their early ones, sitting together by the fire, talking and remembering and loving. Jacob died first on a warm summer evening, with Clara holding his hand and all their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you, Clara. Best decision I ever made was helping you that winter. Best life I could have imagined." Clara grieved deeply but without bitterness. She had been blessed with a long and happy marriage, with a man who had loved her completely and whom she had loved in return. She lived 2 more years, surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days, passing on the family history and values to yet another generation. On the night she died, peacefully in her sleep, her grandson found a letter she had written to be read at her funeral. In it, she told the story one more time, the story of the frozen garden and the cowboy who shared his food stores through the winter. She wrote about how one act of kindness had changed her life, had created a family, had built a legacy. She urged her descendants to remember that lesson, to help others when they could, to be kind even when it was difficult, to build their lives on love and integrity and generosity. "Your grandfather saved my life," she wrote, "but more than that, he showed me how to live. He taught me that we are stronger together than apart, that kindness is never wasted, that love can bloom even in the hardest times. Remember this, live by this, and pass it on to your own children. This is the real inheritance we leave you, not land or money, but the knowledge of how to be good people, how to build good lives, how to make the world a little better than you found it." The letter was read at her funeral in the church in Copper Ridge, the same church where she and Jacob had married more than 50 years before. There was not a dry eye in the congregation. The story of Clara and Jacob became legend in the territory, told and retold through generations. The school Clara had founded continued to operate, eventually becoming a public school that served the region for 100 years. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each one remembering the principles on which it was built. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled, when times were hard and the future uncertain, the descendants of Clara and Jacob would tell the story. They would tell about the frozen garden and the desperate young widow, about the cowboy who knocked on her door with a pack horse full of supplies, about the kindness that saved a life and created a love story, about the winter they survived together and the lifetime they built together. They would tell the story, and they would remember the lesson, that in the hardest times, we help each other. That kindness matters. That love can bloom anywhere, even in a frozen garden, even in the depths of winter. That one person reaching out to another can change everything. The story lived on, as all great love stories do, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the enduring truth that we are all better together than we are alone. And in a way, Clara and Jacob lived on too, in the family they created, in the values they instilled, in the love they shared that echoed through the generations. It all began with a frozen garden and a cowboy who chose to help. And from that simple act of kindness, something beautiful and lasting was born. A family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the cattle or the land or the wealth they accumulated. Not even the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, though they were deeply loved. What mattered was the love between two people who found each other in the wilderness, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives, who built something meaningful together out of hardship and hope. The Montana winters continued to come, harsh and unforgiving, just as they always had. Gardens still froze, people still struggled, but because of Clara and Jacob's example, because of the story that was passed down through generations, there were always those who remembered the lesson, There were always those who reached out to help, who shared what they had, who chose kindness over indifference. And sometimes, just sometimes, that kindness led to something more, to friendship, to community, to love. Just as it had for a desperate widow and a kind cowboy in the winter of 1883, when a frozen garden became the beginning of a beautiful love story that would last for all time. The wind blew through the valley where the ranch still stood, where the descendants of Clara and Jacob still worked the land and raised their families. The mountains stood eternal and majestic. The rivers ran cold and clear. And if you listened very carefully on a quiet winter evening, you could almost hear the echo of that first meeting, that first act of kindness that changed everything. "Mrs. Hartwell," a voice seemed to whisper on the wind, "I have more supplies than I need for the winter." And another voice, hesitant but hopeful, "Come in out of the snow, Mr. Brennan, and thank you, truly." It was just a memory now, a story told and retold, but it was also something more. It was a reminder of what is possible when we choose to help each other, when we open our hearts to love, when we build our lives on kindness and integrity. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope exists, that even when everything seems lost, help can come, that even a frozen garden can give birth to new life, new love, new possibilities. Clara and Jacob were gone now, returned to the earth they had loved and worked, but their legacy remained, strong and lasting, rooted deep in the Montana soil. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story. Their ranch still stood, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together with love and determination. And their example still inspired, reminding each new generation of the values that truly matter: love, kindness, generosity, community, integrity. These were the things that lasted. These were the things that mattered. These were the gifts that Clara and Jacob left behind, far more valuable than any material wealth. The winter sun set over the ranch, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the houses scattered across the property. Children's laughter rang out as the youngest generation played in the snow. Inside the main house, the family gathered for dinner, continuing the tradition Clara and Jacob had started so many years ago. Before the meal, as they had done for generations, the family took a moment to remember, to tell the story, to honor the love that had created them all. "Her garden froze before the harvest could come," someone began, and the familiar words rang out in the warm room. But a cowboy shared his food stores through the winter, and from that simple act of kindness, everything began. And everyone listening knew it was true. They were living proof. They were the harvest that had come from that frozen garden. They were the fruit of a love that had begun in the hardest of times and endured through everything. They were the legacy of two people who had chosen each other, helped each other, and built something beautiful together. The story was over, but its impact continued. And in that continuation, in that living legacy, Clara and Jacob achieved a kind of immortality. They lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had shared. They lived on in every act of kindness, every helping hand extended, every person who chose to reach out instead of turning away. The frozen garden was long gone, returned to the earth, but what had grown from it remained, strong and vital and enduring, a family, a community, a love story that would never truly end, and that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.